Make sure you have a smartphone in hand, just as an interactive element to today's session. I'll also forewarn, I tested that about half an hour ago and we were having some issues with the website, but fingers crossed that everything will be good to go on that. So we're going to start off considering about why planning. One of the theories that we talk about is known as the VUCA world. So for many businesses, for a long time, people have sometimes reacted in a more reactionary basis, taking each day as it comes and changing the way that you approach the business based on responses to immediate issues and threats. But there is an old theory which originates from the American military in the 80s that the world moves between states of what they call VUCA. You'll see that on the screen now. So volatility is the nature and dynamic of change. This includes stuff like the speed of change and potential catalysts of change to your organization. Uncertainty refers to the lack of predictability, prospects for surprise, and the sense of awareness and understanding of issues and events surrounding. Complexity refers to the sheer number and magnitude of forces that impact change, confounding issues, and unclear cause and effect chains. Ambiguity refers to the potential for misunderstanding, mixed meanings of conditions, and the combination of the other factors to create an unclear view of the world. Between many of the contemporary challenges we face, society is currently in a high level of all these VUCA elements, and as an organization, you have to plan and adapt to stay agile and productive. One of the best ways to do this effectively and efficiently is to predict and plan your most VUCA asset of all, your people. So we'll start off with what is workforce planning. Simply put, workforce planning is about making your organization resilient, agile, and productive in an uncertain world. It's about making sure you have the right number of people with the right skills, in the right place, at the right time, at the right cost, on the right contract, on the right objectives. We've talked a little bit about financials in here, with workforce planning ultimately be aligning your human, strategic, and your financial. Effective workforce planning contributes to your wider productivity as a business, and ultimately, costs matter. If you get the workforce planning right, you can maximize the efficiency and minimize the cost of working with your people. And if we boil workforce planning down to a nice simple concept, it's about demand and supply. We usually hear this phrase the other way around, but workforce planning is a demand-first strategy. Demand is about examining the business changes that impact your need for people, and supply is about looking at how those needs can be met through people. Efficient workforce planning is about identifying the gap between demand and supply and providing clear actions to address these. So I'm going to be asking you a little question next. You'll see a QR code on the screen now. Alternatively, if you go to menti.com, it'll ask you for a code, which you'll see on the screen. And I've listed some things that are commonly talked about in today's world about what extent these common contemporary issues. I want you to consider how much of a threat they are to your organization and the way that you run as a business. So I'm going to leave the code on the screen briefly for you to access that on your phone. And once most of you have got on, we'll move across then and we'll see the answers that we've got and have a little chat about what that's looking like. So we've started getting some responses through. So I'm going to pop up on the screen where we are. Also give you a moment as well if you're still going through any of those. Is there anything on there which you would consider a threat to your organization or that isn't on there that you'd like to have a chat about whilst we're waiting for the last few results to go through? Because whilst these are some of the key themes that people are talking about, obviously every organization is different. So if you've got anything that you'd like to share whilst we're waiting on these last few results, now will be a great time. Okay, looking at this moving forward, one of the things that we want to take away from this is you'll see the number, which is obviously the average score that people have given, but behind you'll see a graph of roughly where people have voted. And what you'll see across all these different challenges is that perhaps with the exception of one or two, there is quite a large divergence. So lots of organizations might experience the same challenges, but the actual level of impact that they're going to have varies greatly. Great to see that some more results have come in there. And you'll see, especially looking at Brexit, if we were thinking 6-12 months ago, that probably would have been right at the top for lots of people. That's perhaps coming down slightly. COVID is taking over as one of the key things and has done, but also perhaps that's starting to drop off slightly. The interesting one, which is that top one, is skills shortages and recruitment issues. This is something that lots of businesses are facing, so it's quite handy that we've got this session today about performance and succession planning and about the best ways to do that and build your leaders internally. So before we move on, I just wanted to see whether anyone's got any comments on what they can see here, anything they'd like to share, have a chat about before we kick on and start talking in a bit more detail. Okay, so this seems like a good chance for us to move on to the next session. How do I actually plan my workforce? Workforce planning is a fairly simple process, and if you focus on the 4 key questions on the screen now, you can't really go wrong. First off, it's important to have a semblance of the context of the organization under the first 2 questions here. Consider where you've come from compared to the current context of your organization. You'll see how the business has evolved over time and how this might have resolved challenges, but also created new ones. It seems somewhat ironic to start a forward-thinking activity by reviewing the past, but this will make sure that you are learning from what can be done, what has been done, and how to do it based on successes and challenges of the past in your organization. This demand for people is generated by business strategies, goals, and plans. It's vital to understand the direction and priorities of the business previously and in its current situation. And once you've done this, you can review your existing situation regarding your people. You need to define clear groups of your workforce for the purposes of this planning and analyze your existing information. Not just look at the data, but also listen to the stories in your organization. Are you underskilled or understaffed in certain areas? Which parts of the business are performing well? What's changed? What's the difference? Potentially, what has not changed? The key aspect of this stage is speaking to your people, whether that's senior managers, frontline managers, or your wider workforce. It's important to give people an opportunity to have their voice heard. Take that information and use it to fuel your strategies around people. Once you're feeling that you're clear on the now, it's time to start considering the future. Think about the direction of your business and estimate the kind of demand that will be required from your people. For example, if you're looking at developing a new kind of product or looking to break a certain market, what kind of skills are going to be required to make this a success? Maybe you're just looking to ramp up your day-to-day operations. How will you be able to do this? Of course, uncertainty between some of those challenges that we talked about earlier will affect this, but think about the longer-term strategy of the business and your real-time operations now, and you'll have a solid idea of what needs to happen next. Once you're confident in knowing your workforce demand, it's time to view the workforce supply. Think about where these needs can be met. Is it internally through succession planning and developing your staff? We'll talk about that in a bit. Alternatively, do you need to bring new talent and skills into the organization? That bit I've talked about in a previous session. Do you need to grow in volume or in skills, or both? Sometimes this growth can actually be effective with your business as usual approach, but sometimes the gap between demand and supply may be so great that you need to fundamentally rethink your strategy in order to deliver something realistic. Consider your market. As one example, if you're in a highly remote location, but your strategy is going to require you to employ a large number of highly skilled, unique technical individuals, but you can't offer remote working or can't pay significantly above the market rate, then your planning is just going to keep hitting a dead end because you'll struggle to bring that skill set and the people into your business. This is the key step of workforce planning. Identify the demand and supply gap, then develop an action plan to remedy it. Before I move on to the next slide, I just want to see whether anyone's got any questions or comments on what I was talking about there. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. where we're going to be talking about succession planning. Succession planning is talked about a lot in organizations, but it can often mean different things to different areas about the business. This is about meeting that demand-supply gap for people through internal processes. Get your strategy relating to people right, and you'll not only keep your top-performing talent, but you can also create an environment and culture for them to thrive. Developing your future leaders in-house is not only more cost-effective in the short and long term, but you'll have leaders who understand and embrace the specific culture and context of your business. It's a way of making sure that demand is met without needing to bring large amounts of new people into the organization. And if you've got a culture that you're happy with and people that are living and breathing those values on a day-to-day basis, then it makes sense to develop those into your future leaders. But what's actually the best way to do that? There's some key steps on the screen now which you should use as part of channeling your succession plan. The first point is to identify roles. Work with your managers across the business to identify crucial roles across the organization. You don't need a succession plan for every role in the business, but focus on ones which are either key to business operations or they're specifically difficult to recruit for due to technical skills or the kind of experience that's required. Moving on, you want to construct profiles. Make sure that the job description and any role profiles are comprehensive. You want to know exactly what the skills, behaviors, and competencies are for each position before you start moving on into what this plan might look like. Next, you want to assess your pool. Look at your existing internal talent. Identify potential employees who may fit relevant profiles. We'll talk a little bit more about assessing talent on the next few slides. We then want to look at creating development plans. Use SMART goals to help move the potential successors into a position to advance towards the role profile. If you get this plan right, you get individual plans for each individual. You know where they're moving, what they need to achieve, and the kind of learning and development that they need. This is something that's really key to succession planning because it'll help create the right kind of environment for those people to grow. It's also really important to review this moving forward. Different organizations might take different approaches to review. Lots of people do it on an annual basis if sort of annual appraisal cycles are the way that you approach your performance management. You can then intrinsically link performance management as part of your succession plan. Alternatively, though, with this long-term thinking, these things take time to stew and develop. So it can be worth extending that period a little bit as well. Lots of this depends on the seniority of the roles. If they're highly senior roles, then you might want to wait a little bit longer because it can take high-performing and high-potential individuals a bit of time to actually develop the kind of skills that they need. If you're looking more at your supervisory frontline manager area, this is something that you might want to hold more regularly as well. It also depends on the turnover in your organization. If you do have mid to senior level roles, but you tend to turn over above the average, which is 15% in the UK, then it might be worth holding more relevant, regular succession plans just to make sure that you're getting the right kind of skills in-house and you can do it at the right frequency. So next up, I was going to show an example succession plan, but before I do that, I just want to give another opportunity if anyone's got questions or any comments they'd like to share before we move on. Okay, I'll move on. If you do have anything, but you don't want to bring yourself off mute, just pop it in the chat. You'll also have my email address at the end. So if you do think of any questions later on, don't worry, you can send me an email and I can get back to you, and perhaps we can have a chat afterwards. So just to give you a rough idea, this is an example of a succession plan. It's very basic and it's very general, but this is something that you might want to look at as a starter for 10 when you're developing the kind of plan that you need moving forward. So we've got 3 roles in advancing seniority, and we've got 3 key sessions across. We've got people that are ready now to move into these roles, people that are likely to be ready in the next 1 to 2 years, and also potentially long-term plans, 3 to 5 years. Andrew, in response to your question about 15%, that is broken down. If you do some searching online, you'll be able to find statistics relevant to your particular area and other areas through the UK. I'll be honest, I can't remember off the top of my head. It does tend to be higher in sort of manufacturing environments and that kind of industry. It's also particularly high at the moment. One of the original slides where I was talking about the challenges, we mentioned the Great Resignation. So basically, due to the skills shortage, the number of people leaving their roles is higher than it's been in a long time, which is resulting as well in inflated wages because there's so much demand. So we are probably at a period in the UK where we're experiencing significantly high turnover. But yeah, in terms of specific sectors, the CIPD is probably a good place to look for specific information, and you'll be able to compare that then with your own organization against the wider UK average. Some businesses also choose to share this information amongst themselves. So if you have any specific competitors in the sector, you might want to think about arranging some sort of working group where you can run through this information, compare it against each other, because then that's something that you can all work towards. And whilst it is sharing information with other local businesses, it is something that lots of people are now choosing to do that more collaborative way, just to make sure that you're working on as much information as you can possibly get. So in terms of the plan that I've got on the screen now, there are some positives and negatives about this. Ultimately, all but one of these boxes has an employee in. There's clear planning, the short, medium, and long-term thinking in place for these roles. You'll also see that employees might be put across the different roles. So for example, we've got our head of ops there with employee 1. Whilst they might be ready soon for that head of ops role, they're immediately ready to step into that assistant head of ops. This is obviously going to look very different depending on your organization, the kind of people that you have, the skills required. So this is really something that's general and you should look over. In terms of weaknesses, so we've just been talking about that 15% turnover rate. If we were to do this succession plan every 2 years, and we've got 6 employees on the board, that would assume that by the time we next get around to doing the succession plan, we're actually going to lose two of these 6 people. Almost all of our boxes, other than 3, only actually contain 1 employee. So especially spikes in turnover, but also just the general day-to-day average of people leaving and moving on from organizations. There's a bit of dangerous potential there for the succession plan to be ripped apart by the next time you come to reviewing it. Obviously, these things are not and never will be an exact science, so you can never fully count on it. But ultimately, making sure that you have several employees fitting within each box will just make sure that you cover yourself off in the case of any unexpected departures or the like. In terms of assessing your internal pool, so when you're using something like this and you want to think, okay, who are potentially our employees, it can be really useful to have something that we call a performance potential matrix. Even if you're not going into in-depth succession planning, this can be something that's also really useful for general team management. An example, and a commonly used one, is up on the screen now. So, each member of the organization, within their own department and context, is rated in both performance and potential from low to high. Based on their rating for each, they end up in one of the boxes you see on the screen now. You might choose to call them different things when you have your approach to the performance potential matrix, but this tends to be a rough way that these are used. In general, the red boxes are something that needs immediate action because it's being disruptive to your organization. Blue boxes are going to be satisfactory, it's going to be the majority of your employees, and ultimately they are essential to your day-to-day operations. Yellow is obviously the aim. That's where we want our people to be achieving. It's not realistic for everyone, but that's your cream of the crop high performers. So with low performance, low potential, we've got risk. Ultimately, these are people that you might want to consider managing out of the business. Carefully consider the impact they have, whether it's something that's generally positive to the organization. If you decide that there's potentially, a net negative contribution, then you want to consider that individual's future within the business. If the potential remains low, but the performance is increasing, they'll come in as an average performer. At this point, you want to be considering development activity to help them grow in terms of their contribution to the business. The action you need to take isn't as immediate as risk, but you still want to make sure that you're getting the most out of that level of person. When the performance is high, but you feel the potential is lower, these are people that we call gurus. They're essential in your business operations. They're comfortable in their role and they're very good at it. I can personally think of some, and I can guarantee at some point we've all worked with a guru, someone that's just got a job to do, gets it done well. In terms of managing the guru, they tend not to be as interested in upward mobility, but you still need to take action to keep them invested in your business and develop them. They might be interested in sideways mobility, working with different departments and teams in the business as a way of making sure that any learning and development needs they have are met. If we're increasing the potential, but looking at low performance, we've got inconsistent, which is our last red box. There's the potential for a real useful contributor to this, to the organization through this individual. And much like the average performer, you want to carefully consider the kind of development activity that's going to help them grow and develop. When that performance increases, they move into the core performer box. The majority of your staff are going to fall into the core performer box. They're good, solid members of the team, and there's a reasonable level of growth potential here. They follow your standard day-to-day processes around learning and development. They go through the right pathways. They follow the performance management, and there's the potential for growth there. But also, much like the guru, these are people that are really key to your day-to-day operations. When they continue to perform, they could potentially move into the high performer box. These are quite similar to your gurus, but they tend to operate more at a supervisory frontline manager level. People that are critical to the organization because they're so good at getting things done, but might not necessarily be interested in that next step of upwards mobility because they're comfortable and happy in the role that they're doing. And there's nothing wrong with that. When you're talking about your high potential people, if you feel someone's got good potential, but the performance is low, we call them the potential gem. With these individuals, you want to consider a reward risk analysis. If the performance is so low that you feel it might be proving a negative contribution to the company, then much like the inconsistent, average, and risk performers, we need to think about their future in the organization. But ultimately, if you think they've got high potential, you've seen something going on there. Perhaps they're underutilized. Perhaps they're in the wrong kind of team or environment. If you are confident in this individual's potential, consider what it is you think that's holding them back and causing that poor level of performance. Take the right steps, and these are brilliant individuals to develop. Our final two boxes are the high potential worker and the future leader. These are the cream of your crop. Do whatever it takes to keep these people if you want to succeed as a business. In terms of this, we often think and talk about performance as dynamic, but potential as fixed. But this simply isn't the case. People's potential may seem lower than it actually is because they're not in the right environment that they can thrive in. There might be other circumstances affecting this. If you consider both potential and performance as dynamic in your approach, you'll really maximize your talent pool and you'll be able to be really efficient in terms of your succession planning. So based on this, what are your thoughts on what you see there? Can you think about your team, and are there, is that this sort of system that would fit you, or potentially how might you want to change that in your organization? Feel free to speak up if you have any particular thoughts or questions. Because on that front, with a bit of a whistle-stop tour on all things succession and performance management, we have reached the end of today's session. So if you do have any questions or queries that you want to raise, now's the best time. Obviously there, you've also got my email address where you'll be able to get in touch with me if you think of any further down the line.
Looks like they're all good today, Alex.
Yeah, looks like
well,
so comprehensive.
Their lunch while they're listening to you, yes, must have done very well there. Fabulous. Oh, was it Andrew? Good tool to show senior teams view and extended team potential and plan accordingly.
Yeah, I think from my view, that 3x3 matrix of sharing teams' potential, it's so visceral and easy to understand. It's a really good way of quickly communicating your view on a team. And it can actually be a really useful exercise if you've got multiple senior people looking after a team. So just give a pool of names, every individual puts them where they feel they'd be on that matrix, and then just have a roundtable discussion. Sit there, because you can actually learn a lot about the different members of your team, because everyone's got different views. They work with these people in different individual ways, and just having that kind of organic, open discussion about people's potential, it can really help as part of that succession and workforce planning, because quite often nobody has a better view of what these people are like and how they can contribute to the organization than their line managers.
Fab stuff. Thanks, Alex. I think you're back with us next Wednesday, is it the next one?
Yes, I am indeed.
Yes, lunch and wellbeing and mental health, taking care of your colleagues. It's the next one coming up there. So if anyone wants to jump on, just go on Eventbrite and you'll find us on there. Or if you've got any questions, queries, just drop us an email at the admin AGP. We'll look forward to seeing some of you, I think, already booked onto that one anyway. So thanks, Alex, for another useful afternoon or quick lunchtime session there. And again, if you have any questions that you can think of that come to you later, just drop Alex an email there as well, and I'll get back to you. And hopefully we'll see some of you on next week's session as well. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.